Processing Universe. It's Hank Balch. You're tuning in for episode 6 of Unbroken, care and handling of endoscopes. In this particular episode, we're talking preventative maintenance of your endoscopes, getting out in front of your scope repair problems. We've got a great lineup of guests are going to be joining us today to talk about, hey, what are the issues that are facing you on the repair side of your scopes? What's the impact and the implication when your scopes go down? And is it a good policy to just use the scope until it's completely broken, non-functional, and then worrying about the issues around PM and replacement? I think you probably know the answer to that, but we're going to go into some more nuance. We're going to share some insight. Then we're going to wrap up this entire 6-part series. So hang with us even to the end of the episode as you get a couple of words of what's next. How do you take everything that you've learned from this series and apply it to your day-to-day life as a professional, to your department, and even to your industry as a whole? So hang with us. We'll be right back to kick off episode 6. All right, we're back in studio for this episode 6 of Unbroken, care and handling of endoscopes. We have talked about a lot of things already in the life and the flow of these devices. We started at the point of use. We went through transport. We talked about the decontamination phase. Even talked about the tools and the inspection. We talked about storage, disinfection, sterilization debates. And we're going to wrap this really unique and creative series on the topic of preventive maintenance. Some of this has already come up, and so some of these themes we'll be picking up and kind of diving a little deeper into. But then we're also going to talk about things that we haven't quite discussed yet. But before we get too deep into the interview, if this is your first time, if you missed out on the first 5 episodes and you're like, well, you know what, I'm going to start at 6, and if I like it enough, I'll go back at the beginning and start to catch up. I do want to introduce our panelists here today, or at least let them introduce themselves. We do have 3 all-stars at the table. Maybe let's start first with Bobbie Gaskins. What's your story, and what do you do in the space today, Bobbie?
Thank you very much, Hank. My name is Bobbie Gaskins, and I am the operations manager of our sterile processing ambulatory surgery centers for the Cleveland Clinic. I am also honored to be the president of our Northeastern Ohio Central Service Association. I've been doing sterile processing since high school, and I love it, and it's my passion. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
And that's OG since high school. You know, not a lot of us can say that, but that's fantastic. I hadn't heard that part of your story yet.
Yeah, trade vocational school in Cincinnati. So graduated high school certified and have been doing it ever since.
Wonderful. Awesome. Welcome to the show. Back to the show, I should say.
Thank you.
Let's go next to Nicholas.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Hank. Thanks for having me again. And my name is Nicholas Day. I am a regional manager at University Hospitals in the Cleveland, Ohio area. Western side, I have responsibility over 2 medical centers for sterile processing, high-level disinfection, and equipment management. And like Bobbie alluded to, I also sit on the Northeast Ohio Central Service Association chapter as her partner and VP, and been volunteering on that, association for about a decade now. And, we love, educating, and that's why we're here today. So I look forward to it.
And to continue the stream of little known facts, we just found something out from Bobbie a second ago, and I'm going to tell some about Nicholas that I guess I knew, but we also just talked about it before we went on air. You're also a bit of a DJ, and so we may see some of those DJ skills come into play here soon. I'm just going to leave it at that, but I want to throw that out there in case anyone's curious. All right, well, welcome, Nick. And Garett, you know the drill. You're going to have to tell us who you are, but now you're also going to have to tell us something interesting about yourself that we may not know yet.
Interesting. Okay. Well, yep. Garett Kaple, the marketing manager for reprocessing at Richard Wolf. I handle the product management, creative marketing strategy for the reprocessing products. And I am also local to the Cleveland area, but I didn't have a chance to meet Nick and Bobbie until actually out in Las Vegas at the National HSPA meeting. So looking forward to partnering with them and working with them in the future. Something not a lot of people know about me is I kind of randomly stumbled into marketing in the healthcare industry as a whole. I actually have a degree in aeronautics, and I worked for the FAA as a air traffic controller and also in the flight data unit for a few years, and decided my passion was back in the healthcare marketing. So yeah, that's how I just randomly decided to get back into it, really. But fun fact.
It sounds random, but if you go to enough of these healthcare conferences, they reference the aviation industry so stinking much as the vision for where we want to go quality wise. And so I'm certain a lot that you've learned there, you're carrying over into this space. The good things, right? The things that healthcare needs to improve.
And from the FAA, I'm used to rules and regulations, so that's nothing new.
There you go.
All, so.
All right. Well, welcome, Garett, and good to have you back.
Appreciate it.
Let's jump right in here. We got a long way to go and a short time to get there, as I like to say. And one of the biggest topics in this repair and preventive maintenance conversation, Bobbie, is when do we need to do these things? Or maybe let me ask it a different way. Why do facilities sometimes wait so long to do PMs or do minor repairs, almost to the point of they're going to use this device until it just is completely non-functional before they pull it out of the workflow to start taking a look at these things? Why is that so common?
Really, it's a workflow disruption when you're pulling a scope out. No one wants to go down a scope. And if you don't have a high inventory, it can be even more of an issue, which then can delay procedures. And we have a physician with their hair on fire. And so that's been really the reasons behind what we see in our facilities, why they don't want to send them out.
So this may be a really softball question for you, but what's the deal with not having enough inventory? Is it that clinicians don't know how many scopes they need? I'm not going to throw out any other answers, but yeah, what do you think? What's the cause of this?
They start the facility with an ideal caseload in mind, and then it grows and grows, and they don't always provide the resources that you need to support the procedures that they're performing. So that's probably reason number one, I would say. And then additionally, we see physicians only want to use a pediatric scope, or they only want to use an adult scope. And so we may have enough adult scopes, but then we have a physician come in and go, oh no, I only want to use pediatric. We see that in our ASCs quite frequently. So we'll have the inventory, but the physician only wants to use a certain device.
And is that, I'm assuming they're making those decisions clinically, right? It's not necessarily just preference, but they're saying, I need this particular version of this device because either my patients are smaller or I'm going into smaller parts of the body with this scope. Okay.
I would love to say yes to that, but I do see it being like a preference thing. Unfortunately, like we have one surgeon and he's like, every time, every person, it's a pediatric scope, occasionally an adult, but it's like a preference thing for him. So unfortunately, we do see that.
Yeah, that's not that surprising, though. If you look at maybe the general instrumentation, we've been working for years now, it seems like, in the industry, getting away from what was known, I guess, as doctor-specific trays that have their names on them. And yeah, we see that same dynamic. It's the same device dock, and this other tray just doesn't have your name on it. And they're like, no, I want the Dr. Johnson tray. And that's what I'm going to go with. So yeah, breaking down that conversation, Nick, between clinical necessity and this preference that Bobbie's alluding to, that's not an easy thing to do. But then there's implications, obviously, when it impacts the repair and the replacement of these scopes. What challenges, have you seen any other additional challenges in your experience out there around the lack of, maybe I'll say, proactive repair and, PM programs for your scopes?
Yeah, I was going to chime in and add a point to the previous comment, about the physicians using, the scopes that may not be the clinical route it should be used on. I think it comes down to, too, a lot of these physicians are coming from other organizations and they may be used to a certain manufacturer's scope, but then when they get to this new organization, they get this different model, different manufacturer scope. And as we all know, like one scope to another scope, like it could be the same style scope, but it has different lumen sizes or different, the French diameters of the distal tips. So when they're doing a procedure, going in the urethra or whatever it may be for a urology case, some of these docs want a thinner scope or, a thicker scope, depending then they may not be as versed on how to use it as they were the other manufacturer scope. So it's, that contributes to some of that damage. But yeah, going back to the question, I think it split it in two. It's proactive and reactive for a lot of these PM programs. And what I've seen, even coming in, to an organization or, going to interimly do an assignment and help lead a site interimly, I've seen where it's mostly on the reactive end, and you really have to work to put in standardized, consistent process with that team and work with your OEM vendor partners to come in and perform in services and really show the team how to perform those inspections, PM inspections. I look at these proactive inspections. We're doing that on every single scope, and that is our routine inspection, really based on the IFU. I mean, that's your number one source of preventative maintenance right there.
And so you would say, I guess, in those two categories, you would put in the reactive category, if a scope makes it all the way to the user, and then they go to use it, and they're like, this is not doing what it should be doing, whatever it is, if it's the angulation or if it's just, seeing through the visualization part of it or whatnot, that's when these scopes get tagged. And, back to the original question, it's become an issue there that is so bad now the scope is non-functional in the eyes of the user. So you would put that in kind of the reactive category, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, like whether it be like, one scope doesn't angulate as much as another scope, and that causes a break, at a distal tip or something. Whatever. We see it all the time on different things, or even semi-rigids being bent. They're made to bend a little, but when they bend them too much, you're going to be breaking the rods and the fibers.
I want to come back to that piece, that communication from the user around issues with the scope. So just put a pin in that just for a moment. I'm going to go to you next, Garett, though, in this concept of the total cost of ownership. I think there's a couple of different phrases that kind of mean that in our space, but it's basically our facilities are buying these devices, these scopes, and there's a price tag that's associated with that purchase. And then there's another price tag that's associated with keeping this purchase clean, sterile, and functional every time that it gets into the hand of the user. And we're talking about repair and maintenance. Can you speak to the impact of a good PM, a good repair program, and the impact that has, in your opinion, on that total cost of ownership?
Sure. Yeah. So those are all really good points you brought up. I mean, there's more than just purchasing the device and using it on the procedure. There's a ton of costs that go into it. And obviously one of them is service, because things do wear down over time or break if they're not used correctly. So and we understand that cost is a big issue. So that's where we have different tiered programs for whether it's preventative maintenance, or there's a program that just includes all of it, preventative maintenance, all the way down to discounts on scope repairs. And then if you just want preventative maintenance, there's options. So I think just tiering the programs to help out with cost and also customer needs is the number one. I mean, a majority of companies out there have tiered programs, but I think with ours, we're truly your partner in repair and not just sell you a device and then wait for a phone call type of thing. So we pride ourselves on that.
So Nick, one of the areas that this cost gets lost a little bit, and this is more of a question than a comment, I guess, for you, but to my experience, it's because they actually many times come out of different budgets. And so you got kind of the capital budget that you're purchasing the device. And then you've got this operational budget that you're repairing the device, or even, sometimes depending on the cost, sometimes you're replacing devices through your operational budget. And so these numbers just get real fuzzy, and it's really hard to sit down at the end of the year and say, okay, what did this one device actually cost us for the year of use? Like, where do you say, like, have you been able to drill down and really get your arms around that? Or are there other challenges maybe that I haven't mentioned around really managing that total cost?
So yeah, I probably go above and beyond in some aspects, and more so in the past, but I feel like we have a really, really thorough, effective process in place at both sites now. So I can't speak to a lot of sites that are struggling, but what I've done when I've struggled or come into a struggling site is same thing. Like you look at OR metrics, like KPIs and first case on time starts, how they drill those down, and they're drilling them down to the surgeon and how many minutes late that specific surgeon is and how many times in a month or a quarter that surgeon has been late. We can go down and drill back to the case on what scope was used with what surgeon and start to build KPI or metrics on cost of specific surgeon that is damaging scopes or whatever, and go back to them and have that conversation, whether it be your CMO, chief medical officer of the, your facility, or partner with them or partner with your chief of surgery to, have that conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I don't even think you said the word data, but that's what it is. You're capturing the data to tell the story about this. Like, I guess you use metrics in tying this back to, not only the case it was used in, not only the physician, but also the device itself. So it's not just, hey, we got all these ENT scope repairs, but it's like, are all of the ENT scopes breaking, or is it just this one device that's consistently the one that keeps getting replaced? And getting to that device level at the serialization level, I think is really important.
To add too, real quick, I think it's real important to have that conversation, especially if it's a more critical, like a flex scope per se, and to learn what happened with the break, if it broke during the case with that surgeon. Was it intraoperatively inside of the patient? And could that have, been a susceptible risk to, any kind of infection if the scope were to be exposed internally, things like that. So.
Yeah, that reminds me of a podcast episode we did a couple of seasons ago talking about when new residents come into the facility and the impact on this repair spend. And that's very difficult to see. It is what it is. Medicine is a practice. That's why they call it practicing medicine. And so you've got to practice somewhere. You got to learn and you have to get better. But if you're not aware of that from the cost of ownership standpoint and the data standpoint, and you're just constantly getting hit every time these residents come in, you're not able to tell that story effectively. So I think that's a great practical call out to track this data. I said earlier, Bobbie, that we're going to come back to this. So finally, we are around the topic of getting communication from that point of view. So Nick said, hey, if this happens intraoperatively, it's going to impact, potential things, infection risk, but then also we need to know it for the data side of things. But just getting that information from where the scope was either damaged or discovered to be non-functioning back to sterile processing, who then is the kind of intermediary between us and the manufacturers or the service provider to say, hey, now we need this scope repaired. That's kind of a big communication gap. And there's a lot of things that can get lost in translation. So kind of walk us through maybe what the traditional broken process is, and then maybe also some things that you've done in your experience to improve getting that information from, oh, this is not working, into the hands of the people who can actually repair the devices.
I think we're going to touch on my favorite topic, which is OR-SPD relations.
Okay.
It starts there, and I've worked in facilities where the process is nothing. It's just sent back down to us, and we're expected to figure it out. And currently, I work in my ASCs where we've built very strong OR-SPD relationships, and now we have tags in the OR room for any broken device, and it's a repair tag. It allows them to write who is the surgeon that used it, what room was it in, what is the issue, time, date, signature. We have requested them to go the extra route of calling us to the room in the moment if they can, so we can come in and try to help troubleshoot. And then, from there, we would take the scope if it's broken. We like to get it in our hands, in the room, ensure it's transported to us properly and not just walk down the hallway with a nurse holding it, that it's in a transport bin and that it's transported to us correctly. We have all the information, and have that face-to-face conversation is always ideal. But if you can't, then having that form filled out and sent back down with the scope. And it's my expectation of my leadership team that when we receive that broken scope, they reach out to the rep, try to get a loaner, do that repair process with them, utilize whatever resource we can, and also engage the OR team and ensure that it's documented and communicated that this scope is down. And then lastly, our tracking system allows us to document items that are down or out of service. So we do have an out of service repair shelf, and we ensure that it's not only placed there, but it's scanned there and it has the document saying what's wrong with it. So really just that closed loop communication and ensuring everyone from the OR to SPD is being high reliable and following through.
Yeah, your point about scanning to the out of service area is, such a good piece of practical advice, because it goes down on Tuesday afternoon. They've got cases scheduled for Wednesday morning, and they're scheduling them assuming that we got full inventory unless they're otherwise, communicated to. And yeah, that's just a nasty surprise to come in the next day and be like, oh, actually, we don't have that scope that's scheduled for your first case. If you've got that open level of communication, though, to and from the user for these kind of conversations, I think that's awesome. You also brought up a really important comment on the transportation side. And I just want to flesh this out one more step. Just because the scope is damaged in some way at the point of use doesn't mean it can't get further damaged if it's transported incorrectly. And that's exactly what you alluded to, that we still need to protect it. It's broken, but it's not as broken as it could get.
Right.
So let's still put it in the case. It's still documented accordingly, still hold it, transport it safely. I think that's really, really important for clinicians, especially to hear, because it's easy to be like, it's broken, throw it in, and then they'll get it fixed. But that's the difference in a small repair or a complete replacement if it's poorly handled.
Exactly.
So, Garett, as you kind of paint a biography of the facilities that get this right in the best way, so, your customers out there that approach this cost of ownership, this care and handling piece, and say, hey, we're investing money in these devices, and therefore we want to extend the life of this device as long as possible. What are those kind of key characteristics that you would say, because looking at maybe even new customers, you're like, you know what, I'm pretty confident that they're going to do a good job on these devices because they're doing X, Y, and Z?
So I think it comes down to kind of what I talked about in the previous episodes, is A, having the right tools for the job, and then B, making sure you're using them correctly. So kind of what I'm getting at is, when it comes down to care and handling, paying attention to when you are transporting the device, the transport bin that it's in, or tray, or however it may be. And then also proper pre-treatment is important, like we talked about in previous episodes. So it just comes down to having good standards of practice and then following them correctly. And then it was interesting to hear Bobbie talk about the OR-SPD relationship. I actually had the pleasure of visiting a customer and following the scope from the OR. So we got to see the procedure happen, and then all the way down to the SPD. Came to find out that there was a laser fiber that got stuck in the scope, which was interesting to see. So I understand that relationship so much better after going through that firsthand, not just hearing the blame game going on, So it's interesting to see it firsthand and understand. It gives us a better idea of how we can help and be there for our customers.
Well, speaking of that communication piece, I think that's as good a segue as ever as we move toward the end of this episode. This is the end of the episode, but the end of a series here, but it's not the end of the conversation. So I want to give all three of y'all an opportunity to speak to the audience, who has tuned in for the series. And again, maybe this is their first episode they're tuning into, but, to kind of cast your own personal vision, what this conversation could mean to the individual clinician who's tuning in, what it could mean to their department, what it could mean to their community or their region. And maybe we'll go around the Brady bunch here as it's on my screen. Bobbie, we'll let you go first, and then we'll go Garett, then we'll give Nick the last word here.
What I take away from this is, it's the process, not the people. It's important that we have the process in place. We have the tools and the resources for the team to do the job. And it's important that we implement all the tools that we've spoken about to really have our own preventative maintenance in a sense. We should be, inspecting scopes regularly, utilizing high level magnification, borescopes, residual protein testing, all those items help us at the end of the day protect the patient. So if you take anything away from this, know that if you're under-resourced, you're understaffed, start small. We had to start with doing one residual protein test and slowly working our way up. But just start somewhere with that preventative maintenance and care and really prioritize the importance of it. It's not just general instrumentation. It has a specific process. There's a specific way to handle it. And education is key, of course.
I love that. What about you, Garett? What would you encourage us to do or to think as we continue this conversation of care and handling moving forward?
Sure. I would just say, understand that not only are we your partner in the OR, we're your partner in the SPD. If there's ever a time where you need help understanding an IFU or need us to come do an in-service, we're more than happy. We have a clinical team that travels all over the U.S. I've done in-services myself. We have our sales reps, guardian reps, all of them that do in-services. So also, feedback from customers is great. If there's ever anything they need in the SPD, like, hey, it would be great if we had this to hang on the wall above the sink. That's where I come into play. So I love that kind of feedback because it helps us help them.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. This last 6 episodes has been feedback in some sense from the clinicians, but anyone tuning in, to your point, there's more ideas, circulating out there that can come back, not only to you, but to other clinicians as well. So that's great. All right, Nick, as we go forward here, we've had 6 interviews all around the care and handling journey of these endoscopes. What would you say is most important to keep this industry conversation going?
I think it's most important, number one, to smell all your scopes. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's right. Bobbie brought that up. That's one of the senses.
I think it's a 7-fold approach. I quickly jotted down what they would be. So number one, education, internal education with, amongst our teams, peri-op and whole, endo, including endo, if you're talking endoscopes, and then external, with your vendor partners. On the call, we have Garett, and he's, more than willing to partner with facilities and our local reps to create education. If there's something of value that isn't within the IFU, they're usually more than willing to partner and help get you those kind of documents. Resources for all staff. So whether it be brushes, borescopes, microscopes, a place to put the scope on the sink and pass it through the window, and a place to stage it before it's assembled to keep it safe and reduce cost. Standardization. So with all your stakeholders, standardizing these processes, and then as well as organizationally across your whole system would be even best case. Consistency, again, all stakeholders. Monitoring the process, like we talked about in previous episode, to make sure all stakeholders are providing feedback to one another along the process of transportation, how they're receiving the item, and how in both the clinical setting and back in decon, and then adapting, all stakeholders adapting to changes and or new equipment, new IFUs. And then partnerships, same back to education, just building those partnerships with all your stakeholders, your OEMs and your educators.
I think that word adapting is the one that I'm going to key in on because it's such a commentary on the state of the industry. We're adapting or right now with staffing dynamics, like Bobbie brought up, we're restrained with resources. We don't have enough staff in most of our facilities or as much staff as we would like. We'll put it that way. And technology is changing. We've got next generation tech that's coming in, both on the reprocessing side of things, but then also the devices themselves is changing. So being able to adapt in communication, in data, in education, and how we present that, I think it's a terrific way to wrap this conversation, Nick. And on behalf of the Beyond Clean team, I want to thank everybody. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, just one last thing I forgot to mention about resources and collaboration. If you're not already involved in your local chapter, highly recommend getting involved. Reach out to those chapter presidents or board members and collaborate with them. We host 2 conferences a year. We bring in our reps to have education as well. And, we're also looking to start providing educational content to the community through a chapter podcast, hopefully in the future. So, there's resources not only within your facility, but within your community. And if you need any information on that, please reach out to me personally. And if you are a chapter president or a board member, please reach out to me as well, because I want to connect with that community as much as possible, because we really are stronger together. Thank you, Hank.
Yeah, I would just add, if you're struggling with the process, reach out to us, and we're always more than willing to help. We're all on LinkedIn and social media, and just an email, phone call, text away. So,
yeah. Speaking of contact information, we're going to put everyone's contact in the write-up of the show. And so if you're watching this or listening to this through podcasting, or if you're checking it out through a social media channel, click on the description, and then you'll be able to navigate your way to the LinkedIn profiles for everybody that's been on this series so far. On behalf of the Beyond Clean team and everyone in this endoscope space, I want to say thank you to you all. Thank you to Richard Wolf. Thank you to Garett for casting this vision, for having this conversation out in the open in a way that is going to prompt feedback and communication, hopefully changes in best practice that at the end of the day is going to protect our patients. And it is also going to equip our teams to fight dirty better. So thank you all for a terrific series again, and thank you for a great episode 6 as we wrap here.
Thanks, Hank. It's been fun.
Thanks, Hank.
Thank you, Hank.
That's going to do it for episode 6, Preventive Maintenance, getting out in front of your scope repair problems. And that's going to do it for this entire series, this 6-part series of Unbroken, Care and Handling of Endoscopes, sponsored by Richard Wolf Medical Instruments Corporation. And we had some terrific conversations across this series. And so if this is your first episode tuning in, I would highly encourage you, go back and check episode 1 through 5, and then complete it here, obviously, with episode 6 to get the journey, the full perspective of what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, but then also what the success stories are in the industry today in tackling everything from point of use treatment to transporting to decontamination of these precious cargo that we call endoscopes. And then once you listen, as we said at the end of this episode, that's when the fun begins. It's not when the conversation ends. That's where the conversation continues each and every day that you have a scope come through your department. That's your opportunity as a clinician to apply what you've learned here, what you've been challenged with through these conversations over the last 6 weeks, to push that needle of quality, that needle of safety farther and farther to complete quality, to complete safety, to safe scopes, every procedure, every time. That is our goal. I know that's your goal. It is conversations and projects like this that make it possible. So I want to thank the entire guest lineup of the series. Obviously, I want to thank Richard Wolf for making this happen. And I want to thank you for tuning in and clocking in every day to make patients safe. Without you, none of this would be possible. And as we say all the time here at Beyond Clean, I want to encourage you to keep fighting dirty.